What is the main thing? What is the kaboom in the Bible? What is the point? The answer, I'm afraid, has been lost a lot, and that is why I believe we have churches filled with more tares than wheat, more rotten fish than good fish, because we've simply forgotten what the main thing is.
To be wrong about the gospel is to be wrong where it matters most, in your relationship with God. You cannot be right with God and be wrong about the gospel. We have to be right about the gospel if our ministry is to be right, but even if our standing before God is to be right.
What is the main thing? Answer, the gospel. In the Old Testament, God prattled to us like little children, giving us pictures of the gospel. Fuzzy pictures, but it comes into a technicolor reality in the New Testament when we see the fulfillment of everything written in the Old Testament about the Messiah who must suffer, fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Then we get a sparkling diamond gospel presentation in the book of Romans. Question: how well versed are you on Romans?
Martin Luther called Romans a gateway to heaven. He called it an open door into paradise. He called it the chief part of the New Testament, the very purest gospel. Martin Luther said, every Christian should know Romans word for word, by heart, and should occupy himself with it every day as the daily bread of his soul. Luther said, Romans can never be read or pondered too much. The more it is dealt with, the more precious it becomes, and the better it tastes.
So how does the book of Romans present the gospel? It does not present the gospel as a life enhancement program. Life enhancement is nice, but the gospel is even better than that. How does Romans present the gospel? It does not present the gospel as a way to have better behaved children, or more satisfaction at work, or how to improve your golf swing. Those things are fine, but they pale in comparison to the sparkling diamond of the gospel. May I ask you, have you studied the judicial book called Romans to be reminded this is precisely what the gospel is? And as we ponder it, our understanding of it increases, and it causes us to desire to have the great privilege of rightly bringing that good news to lost people.
God delights in choosing and using the most unlikely people to be his messengers, because that way all the glory goes to God.
You and I are clay pots, and we get to proclaim to lost, befuddled, confused, depressed, and suicidal people the good news of the gospel. So what is it? What is the gospel? How does Paul present it in the book of Romans? He brings you into a courtroom drama, because that's what the gospel is. It is entirely judicial. There is a just judge. There are laws, and there are criminals, and there is a payment that is due that the criminal cannot pay. That is the setup for the gospel. In other words, there's got to be an understanding of the bad news before you can get to the good news that Jesus steps into the courtroom of God's justice, and he willingly pays the fine for the criminal so that the rebel can be set free and restored to a right relationship with God. That is so much better than just having an improved golf swing or better behaved kids. The gospel is judicial. When you evangelize, do you present the gospel that way? May I ask you a question? Have you perhaps been a little gun-shy about witnessing to people because you haven't pondered two thoughts? Number one, what is the gospel? That you have not delved and meditated and pondered how magnificent it is that God would die for sinners. Deuteronomy 4, God gives a fuzzy picture of the gospel, stating, has anybody ever seen a God rescue people from slavery and bondage? Has anybody ever even imagined something that phenomenal? Have you imagined how phenomenal the gospel is as you read the book of Romans to realize, wow, I am a criminal, and the gavel was about to be slammed, and I was on my way to an eternal prison when Jesus, the one that I've been sinning against, whose laws I've been breaking, he says, I'll pay the fine for you. Is it possible that you haven't been evangelizing for that reason? Or is it possible that you haven't pondered lately the privilege that we clay pots have been assigned, that we are given the privilege to proclaim that good news?
Charles Haddon Spurgeon said, if God has called you to be his servant, why stoop to be a king? It is the grandest, most humbling, yet greatest calling that could ever come upon your life, which is to be a messenger of the gospel.
That's your job description. A messenger, a herald of the King, proclaiming release to the captives.